I stood in that courtroom, my heart pounding so hard I thought everyone could hear it. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows across the wooden benches filled with strangers waiting for their own battles. But right now, all eyes were on me, Thomas, and the mess we'd made of 15 years together. Thomas sat at the defendant's table with his expensive lawyer, Mr. Peterson, who charged more per hour than most people made in a week. His perfectly pressed navy suit made him look like the successful businessman everyone thought he was. Amber sat behind him in the gallery, wearing the red dress I'd seen her buy with Thomas's credit card last month. She kept touching her hair and smiling like she was at some social event instead of my divorce hearing. Margaret, Thomas's mother, sat beside Amber with that same cold expression she'd worn since the day Thomas brought me home 20 years ago. Her gray hair was pulled back so tight it stretched her face, making her look even more disapproving than usual. She clutched her designer purse like it was a weapon, probably filled with tissues to dab her fake tears. Judge Patricia Hawkins sat behind her massive wooden desk, looking down at all of us with tired eyes that had seen too many broken families. Her black robe made her seem larger than life, like some ancient goddess of justice. She'd been handling family court cases for over 20 years, and nothing surprised her anymore. "Mrs. Rodriguez," Judge Hawkins said, her voice cutting through the tension like a knife. "Do you have any final evidence to present before I make my ruling?" This was it. The moment I'd been planning for months. My hands shook as I reached into my purse and pulled out a small folded piece of paper. It looked so innocent, just white paper with black ink, but it held the power to change everything. Thomas leaned forward, squinting at me with confusion. He probably thought I was going to beg or cry or make some desperate last attempt to save our marriage. Amber giggled softly behind him, the sound making my skin crawl. She'd been doing that a lot lately, especially when she talked about redecorating my house. "After today, you're nothing," Thomas had whispered to me just this morning as we walked up the courthouse steps. His breath was hot against my ear, and his words felt like ice in my veins. He'd said it so casually, like he was commenting on the weather. Amber had been right beside him, practically bouncing with excitement. "We'll redecorate your house," she'd said with that same giggle, already planning how to rearrange my life. "I'm thinking modern minimalist. All that cozy stuff has to go." Margaret had nodded approvingly, her thin lips curving into what might have been a smile on anyone else. "It finally belongs to people who deserve it," she'd declared, looking at me like I was something stuck to the bottom of her shoe. But now, standing in this courtroom, I felt different, stronger. The scared, confused woman from 6 months ago was gone, replaced by someone who'd learned to fight back. I walked slowly toward Judge Hawkins, my heels clicking against the polished floor. Each step felt like a small victory. Thomas's lawyer started to object, but the judge held up her hand for silence. "What is this, Mrs. Rodriguez?" Judge Hawkins asked as I handed her the paper. "Evidence, Your Honor," I said, my voice steadier than I'd expected. "Evidence that changes everything." Judge Hawkins unfolded the paper carefully, her eyes scanning the contents. At first, her expression didn't change. She was used to last-minute surprises, desperate attempts to sway court decisions. But then something shifted. Her eyebrows rose slightly, and the corner of her mouth twitched. The courtroom was completely silent, except for the hum of the air conditioning and someone's nervous cough from the back row. Thomas was staring at me with growing alarm, probably wondering what I could possibly have that would matter now. His lawyer was shuffling through papers, looking confused and slightly panicked. Amber had stopped giggling. She was leaning forward, trying to see what was happening, her red dress riding up as she stretched. Margaret's knuckles were white where she gripped her purse, and for the first time since I'd known her, she looked uncertain. Judge Hawkins read the paper twice, then looked up at me with something that might have been respect. Then she did something I never expected in a million years. She burst into laughter. Not a polite chuckle or a small smile, but real genuine laughter that echoed off the courtroom walls. The sound was so unexpected that everyone jumped. Thomas's mouth fell open and his lawyer dropped his pen. "Unbelievable," Judge Hawkins said, still chuckling as she looked at the paper again. Then she looked straight at me, her eyes bright with something I couldn't quite identify. "Smart woman." The words hit the courtroom like a bomb. Thomas went completely pale. all the color draining from his face until he looked like he might faint. Amber's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water, and Margaret actually gasped out loud. "Your Honor," Thomas's lawyer stammered, "what is the meaning of this?" But Judge Hawkins was still looking at me, and I saw something in her expression that made my heart soar. Approval, admiration, maybe even a little bit of pride. Thomas was staring at me like he'd never seen me before, his confident smirk completely gone. The man who'd whispered cruel words to me just hours ago now looked terrified. Amber had gone as white as her fake pearls, and Margaret was clutching her chest like she might have a heart attack. "Well," Judge Hawkins said, folding the paper carefully and setting it on her desk, "this certainly changes things. 6 months earlier, I was living in what I thought was a perfect marriage. Thomas would bring me coffee in bed every morning, kiss my forehead, and tell me he loved me before heading to his real estate office. I'd spend my days designing beautiful homes for my clients, never imagining that my own home was built on lies. It was a Tuesday when everything changed. Thomas had left his phone on the kitchen counter while he showered, something he never did. Usually, that phone was glued to his hand like it contained the secrets of the universe. The screen lit up with a text message, and without thinking, I glanced at it. "Can't wait to see you tonight, baby. Wear the blue dress I bought you." My blood turned to ice. I'd never owned a blue dress like that. Thomas had never bought me anything blue because he said it washed me out. My hands shook as I picked up the phone, telling myself there had to be some explanation. The messages went back months. Hundreds of them. Sweet words, romantic plans, intimate conversations that should have been between a husband and wife. But they weren't with me. They were with Amber, his secretary. "You're so much more sophisticated than her," one message read. "She doesn't understand the finer things in life like you do." Another one made me feel sick. "Soon we won't have to hide anymore. Just be patient, sweetheart." I sat on our kitchen stool, the same one where Thomas and I had shared breakfast just an hour ago, and felt my world crumble. 15 years of marriage, and I'd never suspected a thing. How could I have been so blind? When Thomas came downstairs, his hair still damp from the shower, he found me holding his phone. His face went through several emotions in seconds: surprise, fear, then that charming smile he used when he was trying to get out of trouble. "Elena, honey, what are you doing with my phone?" I held it up, showing him the messages. "Who is she, Thomas?" He sat down beside me, reaching for my hands, but I pulled away. His touch felt wrong now, contaminated by lies. "It's not what you think," he said, using that gentle voice he reserved for calming upset clients. "Amber has been going through a rough time. Her boyfriend left her, and she's been reaching out for support." I was just being kind. "Kind?" I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You bought her a dress, Thomas. You told her she was sophisticated." "Elena, please." He moved closer, and I could smell his expensive cologne, the same scent I'd loved for years. "You're taking this out of context? I would never cheat on you. You know that." But I didn't know that. Looking at him now, I realized I didn't know anything about the man I'd married. How many business trips had really been romantic getaways? How many late nights at the office had been spent with her? "I love you," he said, taking my face in his hands. "Only you. Amber means nothing to me. She's just confused and lonely, and I felt sorry for her." I wanted to believe him. After 15 years, I desperately wanted to believe that this was all some terrible misunderstanding. So when he suggested we go to counseling, when he promised to set better boundaries with Amber, when he held me while I cried, I let myself hope. For 2 weeks, things seemed better. Thomas came home earlier, brought me flowers, and even suggested we take a weekend trip to the mountains like we used to. I started to think maybe we could work through this, that our marriage was strong enough to survive one mistake. Then I heard the phone call. I'd come home early from a client meeting because they'd had to reschedule. Thomas's car was in the driveway, but he didn't answer when I called his name. I was about to go upstairs when I heard his voice coming from his home office. "She bought it completely," he was saying, and something in his tone made me freeze. Elena's always been too trusting for her own good. I crept closer to the office door, my heart pounding so loud I was sure he'd hear it. "I know, Mother, but I have to be careful. If she gets suspicious again, she might start digging, and we can't have that." "Mother!" He was talking to Margaret. The house alone is worth $2 million, Thomas continued, and her architecture firm brings in at least $500,000 a year. I've been patient for 15 years, but it's time to move forward with the plan. Plan? What plan? Margaret's voice was faint through the phone, but I caught enough words to make my stomach drop. Never belonged. Our kind of people finally get what we deserve. Amber understands her place in all this, Thomas said. She knows this is about more than just us being together. Elena never fit into our world anyway. She's too common. Common. The word hit me like a slap. I thought about all the charity events where Margaret had introduced me as Thomas's wife instead of by name. All the times she'd corrected my grammar or suggested I wear something more appropriate. I thought she was just being helpful. The prenup will protect us, Thomas was saying. Elena signed it without even reading it properly. She trusted me completely. But we didn't have a prenup. I remembered our wedding planning clearly. Thomas had said we didn't need one because we loved each other. Unless, once the divorce is final, the house will be mine, and Amber can finally move in properly. Elena will get whatever scraps the court decides she deserves. I backed away from the door, my legs shaking so badly I could barely walk. Everything I'd believed about my marriage, about Thomas, about his family accepting me, it was all lies. I wasn't his wife. I was his long-term investment plan. I made it to my car before the tears came, sitting in my own driveway like a stranger. The man I'd loved for 20 years, the man I'd built a life with, had been planning to destroy me all along. But as I sat there crying, something else began to grow inside me, something harder and sharper than grief. If Thomas wanted to play games, I'd show him what a smart woman could do. The next morning, I called in sick to work for the first time in 3 years. Thomas kissed my forehead and told me to rest, his voice full of fake concern that now made my skin crawl. As soon as his car disappeared down our tree-lined street, I called my brother Carlos. Carlos had never liked Thomas. From the moment I brought Thomas home to meet my family, Carlos had watched him with suspicious eyes. Something's not right about that guy, he'd told me back then. He's too smooth, too perfect. Real people have rough edges. I defended Thomas, accused Carlos of being jealous of my happiness. Now I wished I'd listened. Elena? Carlos answered on the first ring. What's wrong? You sound terrible. I need your help, I said, my voice still hoarse from crying. I think Thomas is planning to divorce me, and I need to know what I'm dealing with. There was a long pause. Carlos was a private investigator who specialized in cheating spouses and financial fraud. He'd seen enough broken marriages to know when someone was in real trouble. Come to my office, he said. And Elena, don't tell Thomas where you're going. Carlos's office was in a strip mall between a nail salon and a Chinese restaurant, nothing like the gleaming downtown building where Thomas worked. But when Carlos closed the door behind me, I felt safer than I had in weeks. Tell me everything, he said, settling behind his cluttered desk. I told him about the text messages, about the phone call with Margaret, about the prenup Thomas claimed we'd signed. Carlos listened without interrupting, taking notes in his messy handwriting. First things first, he said when I finished. We need to check if you actually signed a prenuptial agreement. If Thomas forged your signature or tricked you into signing something else, that's fraud. How do we find out? I have contacts at the courthouse. Give me a few hours. While Carlos made his calls, I sat in his waiting room, staring at missing person flyers and wondering how I'd become someone who needed a private investigator. 3 hours later, Carlos came back with a grim expression. There's no prenup on file, he said, which means either Thomas lied to his mother about having one or he's planning to forge one. What does that mean for me? It means you're in more danger than you thought. Elena, I need to ask you something, and I want you to think carefully before you answer. Did you ever sign any documents that Thomas said were for taxes or business purposes? My stomach dropped. A few times. He said they were routine paperwork for his real estate deals. I trusted him. Carlos rubbed his forehead. We need to find out what you actually signed. I'm going to start investigating Thomas's finances, but I need you to do something for me. Can you get into his home office? He keeps it locked when he's not there. Do you know where he hides the key? I thought about all the times I'd seen Thomas unlock that door. He keeps it in his wallet, but there might be a spare somewhere. Find it, look for any documents with your signature, especially anything related to property transfers or business agreements. And Elena, Carlos's voice was serious. Be very careful. If Thomas is planning what I think he's planning, he won't want you discovering it. That evening, I cooked Thomas's favorite dinner and pretended everything was normal. He told me about his day, complained about difficult clients, and asked about my headache. I smiled and nodded and felt like I was watching a stranger perform in a play. After he went to bed, I searched for the spare key to his office. I found it taped under his desk drawer, exactly where someone would hide something they thought was clever. My hands shook as I unlocked the door. Thomas's office was perfectly organized, everything in its place. His desk was mahogany, expensive, covered with neat stacks of contracts and property listings. But it was the filing cabinet that made my heart race. The bottom drawer was labeled Personal Elena. Inside, I found a folder with my name on it, thick with documents I'd never seen before. As I read through them, my world collapsed all over again. There were property transfer documents with my forged signature, giving Thomas partial ownership of my house, business partnership agreements that made him a silent partner in my architecture firm, even a life insurance policy I'd never signed, with Thomas as the sole beneficiary. But the worst was at the bottom of the pile, a detailed plan, written in Thomas's handwriting, outlining how he would systematically take control of my assets. It was dated 3 years ago, long before I'd discovered his affair. Phase 1. Gain access to Elena's business accounts through joint filing. Phase 2. Establish legal claim to house through forged property documents. Phase 3. Introduce Amber as replacement wife after divorce settlement. There were notes about my daily routine, my friendships, even my relationship with Carlos. Elena's brother, suspicious, limit contact was written in red ink. At the very bottom was a letter from Margaret, dated just last month. Thomas, I'm proud of how patient you've been with this plan. Elena never belonged in our family, and it's time she learned her place. The house should go to someone who appreciates its value, and Amber will make a much more suitable wife for a man of your standing. Once this is over, we can finally move forward as a proper family. I photographed everything with my phone, my hands shaking so badly I had to retake several pictures. Then I put everything back exactly as I'd found it and locked the office door. Back in my bedroom, I stared at the ceiling while Thomas slept peacefully beside me. The man who'd held me while I cried about his affair, who'd promised to be better, who'd made me feel guilty for not trusting him. He'd been planning to destroy me for years. But as I lay there in the dark, something crystallized inside me. Thomas thought I was weak, trusting, easy to manipulate. Margaret thought I didn't belong in their world. They both thought I'd roll over and let them take everything I'd worked for. They were about to learn how wrong they were. I wasn't the same naive woman who'd married Thomas 15 years ago. I'd built a successful business from nothing. I'd survived my parents' deaths, put myself through college, and created a life I was proud of. If they wanted a fight, I'd give them one they'd never forget. The next few weeks were the hardest acting job of my life. Every morning, I kissed Thomas goodbye and told him I loved him. Every evening, I asked about his day and pretended to care about his answers. But inside, I was building a case that would destroy him. Carlos had been busy. His investigation revealed that Thomas had been stealing from me for over 2 years, using the forged documents to redirect payments from my biggest clients into accounts I didn't know existed. My architecture firm was bringing in more money than ever, but somehow our joint savings account never seemed to grow. He's been very clever, Carlos explained during one of our secret meetings at a coffee shop across town. Small amounts at first, then bigger chunks as he got more confident. He's stolen almost $200,000 from your business. How is that even possible? The partnership documents you unknowingly signed gave him access to your business accounts. He's been billing your clients through a shell company he created, then transferring the money to offshore accounts. I felt sick. All those late nights I'd spent working on designs, paying all the clients I'd impressed with my creativity and attention to detail, Thomas had been profiting from my hard work while making me feel like I wasn't contributing enough to our household. There's more, Carlos said, sliding a folder across the table. I found out about Amber. The folder contained photographs of Thomas and Amber together, but not just romantic pictures. There were images of them at real estate meetings, signing documents, even touring expensive houses in the hills above our neighborhood. She's not just his mistress, Carlos explained. She's his business partner. They've been using your stolen money to buy investment properties together, properties that will be worth millions in a few years. So this whole thing was planned from the beginning? It looks that way. I also found something else interesting. Remember how Thomas always said he came from old money? His family's wealth comes from his grandfather's construction company, but that business went bankrupt 10 years ago. Margaret's been living off credit cards and loans, pretending to still be rich. Everything clicked into place. Thomas hadn't married me for love. He'd married me because he needed my money to maintain his lifestyle. And now that I'd built something successful, he wanted to take it all and start fresh with someone he thought was more suitable. What do we do now? I asked. We set a trap, Carlos said with a grin that reminded me of when we were kids plotting against our strict babysitter. I have an idea, but you're not going to like it. Carlos's plan was brilliant and terrifying. He'd created a fake identity, a wealthy widow named Patricia Chen, who was looking to build a custom home worth $3 million. She'd specifically requested my architectural firm after seeing my work in a magazine. Thomas won't be able to resist, Carlos explained. A project that big would set you up for life, which means it would set him up for life once he steals it from you. But what if he doesn't take the bait? Trust me, he will. I've made sure Patricia Chen looks like exactly the kind of client Thomas dreams about, rich, naive, and ready to spend money. I spent days preparing for the meeting, designing preliminary sketches for a mansion that would never be built. Carlos had rented an expensive hotel suite and hired an actress to play Patricia Chen. Everything had to be perfect. The meeting was scheduled for a Thursday afternoon. I told Thomas about it casually over breakfast, mentioning that it was the biggest potential project of my career. $3 million? Thomas's eyes lit up with greed. That's incredible, honey. You've worked so hard for this. I'm nervous, I said, playing my part. What if I mess it up? What if she doesn't like my designs? You'll be perfect, Thomas said, but I could see the wheels turning in his head. Maybe I should come with you. You know, for moral support. That's sweet, but this is something I need to do myself. It's important for my confidence. Thomas nodded, but I knew he was already planning how to steal this opportunity from me. That afternoon, I met with Patricia Chen in the hotel suite. Carlos had done an amazing job. The actress was convincing, the suite was elegant, and the whole setup looked completely legitimate. We discussed the project for an hour, with me presenting my designs and her expressing enthusiasm about working together. I'll need a few days to review the proposals, she said in perfect character. But I'm very impressed with your work, Elena. I think we're going to have a wonderful partnership. As I drove home, I felt a mixture of excitement and dread. The trap was set, but now I had to wait to see if Thomas would walk into it. I didn't have to wait long. That evening, Thomas was unusually attentive. He made dinner, opened a bottle of expensive wine, and asked detailed questions about my meeting with Patricia Chen. She sounds very sophisticated, he said. Old money, you said? Her late husband was in tech. She inherited everything when he died last year. And she's looking to spend $3 million on a house? Maybe more, depending on the final design. She mentioned wanting the best of everything. Thomas's smile was predatory. You know, Elena, a project this big might be too much for you to handle alone. Maybe you should consider bringing in a partner. Someone with experience in high-end real estate. Like who? Well, I do work with wealthy clients all the time. I understand what they want, how they think. I could help you navigate this. There it was, the beginning of his plan to steal my biggest client. That's a great idea, I said, hating myself for the lie. Maybe you could meet with her next week? I'd be happy to help, Thomas said, leaning over to kiss my cheek. We're a team, after all. As he held me, I thought about all the documents in his office, all the money he'd stolen, all the lies he'd told. He thought he was so clever, so much smarter than his trusting wife. He had no idea that his loving, naive Elena was about to destroy him. The meeting with Thomas and Patricia Chen was scheduled for the following Tuesday. I spent the weekend playing the nervous wife, asking Thomas for advice about how to impress such an important client. He was more than happy to share his wisdom about dealing with wealthy people. The key is to make them feel special, he explained as we sat in our living room Sunday evening. Rich people are used to getting whatever they want, so you have to anticipate their needs before they even ask. What if she doesn't like working with both of us? I asked, pretending to worry. Trust me, Elena. Once she meets me, she'll understand that we're a package deal. I know how to speak their language. Monday night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about what Carlos had told me earlier that day. He'd installed tiny recording devices in the hotel suite. Everything Thomas said would be captured, every lie he told, every promise he made behind my back. Tuesday morning arrived gray and drizzly. Thomas spent extra time getting ready, choosing his most expensive suit and the gold watch his grandfather had left him. He looked like the successful businessman he pretended to be. Nervous? He asked as we drove to the hotel together. A little, I said, which was true. Not about the fake meeting, but about what we might discover. The hotel lobby was elegant, all marble floors and crystal chandeliers. Thomas straightened his tie as we rode the elevator to the 15th floor, and I could see him mentally preparing his performance. Patricia Chen was waiting for us in the suite, dressed in an expensive cream-colored dress with pearls that probably cost more than most people's cars. She greeted me warmly, then turned to Thomas with interest. "You must be Elena's husband," she said, extending her hand. "I've heard so much about you." "All good things, I hope," Thomas replied with his most charming smile. "Elena's told me about your project." "It sounds absolutely fascinating." For the first hour, everything went according to plan. I presented my designs while Thomas played the supportive husband, offering occasional comments about construction logistics and timeline management. Patricia asked thoughtful questions and seemed genuinely impressed with both of us. Then she excused herself to take a phone call in the bedroom, leaving Thomas and me alone in the sitting area. "She's perfect," Thomas whispered to me, "exactly the kind of client who appreciates quality work. Do you think she'll hire us?" "Oh, she'll hire us," Thomas said with confidence. "I can tell she's already made up her mind." When Patricia returned, she had a concerned expression on her face. "I'm sorry, but that was my financial advisor," she said. "He's raised some concerns about working with a small firm for such a large project. He thinks I need someone with more experience in luxury construction." My heart sank. Even though I knew this was part of the plan, Thomas immediately leaned forward. "I completely understand your advisor's concerns," he said smoothly. "Elena is incredibly talented, but you're right that a project of this magnitude requires additional expertise." I stared at him, pretending to be hurt. "Thomas, what are you saying?" "I'm saying that maybe we need to restructure this partnership," he continued, not even looking at me. "Patricia, what if I took the lead on this project? I have 15 years of experience with high-end real estate, and I work with contractors who specialize in luxury homes. But these are my designs," I protested weakly. "Of course they are, honey," Thomas said in a patronizing tone that made my skin crawl, "and you'd still be involved. But Patricia needs someone who can handle the business side of things, someone who understands her world." Patricia looked between us with apparent confusion. "I'm not sure I understand. Wasn't this Elena's project?" "Elena's very creative," Thomas said. "But she doesn't have experience with clients at your level. She's more comfortable with smaller, simpler projects. This house deserves someone who really understands luxury." The words hit me like physical blows, even though I'd expected them. To hear my own husband dismiss my abilities so casually, to watch him steal my work right in front of me, it took all my self-control not to scream. "I see," Patricia said slowly, "and you think you could deliver what I'm looking for?" "Absolutely," Thomas said, his confidence growing. "In fact, I have some ideas that could take this project to the next level. Elena's designs are a good starting point, but with my connections and experience, we could create something truly spectacular." "Thomas," I said, my voice shaking with real emotion, "this was supposed to be my project." "Elena, be realistic," he said, finally looking at me with barely concealed irritation. "This is a $3 million project. You're not ready for something this big. Maybe in a few years, after you've gained more experience." Patricia watched this exchange with growing interest. "Mr. Mitchell, are you suggesting that you take over your wife's project entirely?" "I'm suggesting a partnership where I handle the aspects that require more sophistication," Thomas said. "Elena can focus on the creative work, and I'll manage everything else. It's really the best solution for everyone." "Including the financial arrangements?" Patricia asked. "Well, naturally, the primary contract would be with my company," Thomas said. "Elena would be compensated as a subcontractor." There it was. He was planning to steal my $3 million client and pay me like a hired employee. In front of the client herself, he was dismantling everything I'd worked for. Patricia nodded thoughtfully. "I think I understand the situation now," she said. "Mr. Mitchell, you've been very enlightening." Thomas smiled, thinking he'd won. He had no idea that every word he'd spoken was being recorded, that his casual cruelty and calculated theft were being captured for the divorce court. He thought he was so smart, so much better than his naive wife. He was about to learn how wrong he was. The next morning, Thomas was practically glowing with satisfaction. He hummed while he shaved, kissed me goodbye with unusual enthusiasm, and told me he'd handle all future communications with Patricia Chen. "Don't worry about the project anymore, honey," he said, straightening his tie. "I'll take care of everything from here. You can focus on your smaller clients." After he left, I sat at our kitchen table and cried. Not because I was sad, but because I was so angry I didn't know what else to do. Hearing him dismiss my work so casually, watching him steal my biggest opportunity right in front of me, it was worse than discovering his affair. Carlos called an hour later. "How are you holding up?" "I want to destroy him," I said, my voice raw. "Good, because we're about to do exactly that. The recording is perfect, Elena. We have him admitting to stealing your client, dismissing your abilities, and planning to cut you out of your own project. But there's something else." "What?" "After you left yesterday, Thomas stayed behind to talk to Patricia privately. He offered her additional services, property management, investment advice, even help finding other business opportunities. He was basically trying to become her financial advisor, using your project as the entry point." I closed my eyes. He's not just stealing one client, he's trying to steal her entire portfolio. Exactly, and Elena, he also badmouthed you pretty severely. Called you limited and not sophisticated enough for serious clients. Said you were holding him back professionally. The words shouldn't have hurt anymore, but they did. This was the man who'd promised to love and support me, who'd held me when I cried about losing my parents, who'd celebrated every success in my career. "There's more," Carlos continued. I had our actress stay in character and ask some probing questions. Thomas told her that he was planning to restructure his business partnership soon and would be available for exclusive consulting work within the next few months. He's already planning the divorce. It gets worse. He suggested that Patricia might want to wait a few months before signing any contracts until his business situation was more settled. He's planning to divorce you and then come back to steal the client permanently. I felt like I was drowning. "Carlos, I can't do this anymore. I can't keep pretending everything is normal." "You don't have to much longer. I think it's time to force his hand." That afternoon, I did something I'd never done before. I went through Thomas's phone while he was in the shower. The messages between him and Amber had gotten bolder since our reconciliation. "The Chen project is going to set us up perfectly," he'd written just that morning. $3 million is just the beginning. This woman has serious money." Amber's response made my stomach turn. "I can't wait to redecorate that house properly. Elena's taste is so basic." "Soon, baby. Just a few more weeks and we can stop hiding." "Your mother called. She wants to know when we're making the announcement." After I secure the Chen contract, I want to make sure Elena can't interfere with the business transition. I screenshot everything, my hands shaking with rage. Then I saw something that made my blood freeze. "Don't forget about the insurance policy," Amber had written. "Margaret says it's important to have that in place before we move forward." Insurance policy. The life insurance document I'd found in Thomas's office, the one with my forged signature. They weren't just planning to divorce me and steal my business. They were planning something much worse. I called Carlos immediately. "We need to meet, now." An hour later, I was sitting in Carlos's office, showing him the text messages. His face grew darker with each screenshot. "Elena, I think you might be in physical danger," he said finally. "This isn't just about money anymore. What do we do?" We end this. Tonight. Carlos's plan was simple and devastating. We would confront Thomas with everything we discovered, but not alone. Carlos had contacts in the police department who specialized in financial crimes. They would be waiting outside our house, ready to arrest Thomas for fraud, forgery, and conspiracy. But first, Carlos said, we're going to give him one last chance to hang himself. That evening, I cooked Thomas's favorite meal again, steak with roasted vegetables and the expensive wine he loved. He was in an excellent mood, talking about his plans for expanding his real estate business. "I've been thinking," I said as we finished dinner. "Maybe I should step back from the architecture firm for a while, focus on being a better wife." Thomas's eyes lit up. "Really? That's wonderful, Elena. I think that would be best for both of us." "I could sign the business over to you," I continued, watching his face carefully. "You're so much better at handling the financial side of things." "That's very generous of you," he said, trying to hide his excitement. "I think that would be a smart move." "And the house, too," I added. "Maybe it should be in your name, since you understand real estate better than I do." Thomas reached across the table and took my hand. "Elena, I'm so proud of you for recognizing your limitations. This is going to be a fresh start for us." "There's just one thing," I said, pulling my hand away. "I found some documents in your office." Thomas's smile faltered slightly. "What documents?" "The ones where you forged my signature. The ones where you stole my money. The ones where you planned to destroy me." The color drained from Thomas's face. "Elena, I can explain." "No need," I said, standing up. "I think the police will be very interested in your explanations." As if on cue, there was a knock at our front door. Thomas looked at me with growing horror as the reality of his situation began to sink in. "You see, Thomas," I said, walking toward the door, "you were right about one thing. This is going to be a fresh start. But not for us, just for me." The police arrested Thomas that night. I watched from our living room window as they led him away in handcuffs, his expensive suit wrinkled and his confident demeanor completely shattered. Amber arrived just as they were putting him in the patrol car, probably expecting another romantic evening. Instead, she found herself being questioned about her role in the conspiracy. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of legal proceedings, but I felt strangely calm through all of it. Carlos had done his job perfectly. We had evidence of everything. The forged documents, the stolen money, the recorded conversations, even the text messages planning my potential accident. Margaret tried to play the innocent victim when the police questioned her, claiming she knew nothing about Thomas's illegal activities. But Carlos had found her handwritten notes about the plan, and her own words condemned her. The woman who'd spent 15 years making me feel unwelcome in my own family was finally facing consequences for her cruelty. 3 months later, I stood in that same courtroom where this story began, holding the piece of paper that would change everything. Judge Hawkins had seen plenty of divorce cases, but she'd told my lawyer this was one of the most elaborate fraud schemes she'd encountered in family court. Thomas sat at the defendant's table, looking nothing like the confident businessman who'd whispered cruel words to me on the courthouse steps. His expensive lawyer had abandoned him when the criminal charges were filed, and the public defender beside him looked overwhelmed by the mountain of evidence against him. Amber was in the gallery, but not to support Thomas. She'd made a deal with prosecutors, agreeing to testify against him in exchange for reduced charges. Her red dress was gone, replaced by a conservative gray suit that made her look younger and more vulnerable. The woman who'd giggled about redecorating my house now faced potential jail time for conspiracy and fraud. Margaret sat alone in the back row, her designer purse clutched tightly in her lap. The family money she'd been so proud of was gone, seized by the government to pay restitution for Thomas's crimes. The house she'd inherited from her husband was being sold to cover legal fees. For the first time since I'd known her, she looked like what she really was. A bitter old woman who'd lost everything because of her own greed. "Mrs. Rodriguez," Judge Hawkins said, "do you have any final evidence to present before I make my ruling?" This was the moment I'd been planning for months. I reached into my purse and pulled out the small folded piece of paper, the same one that had made the judge laugh and caused Thomas's face to drain of color. As I walked toward the bench, I thought about everything that had led to this moment. The discovery of Thomas's affair, the overheard phone call with Margaret, the forged documents in his office, the elaborate trap we'd set with the fake client. Every lie he'd told, every dollar he'd stolen, every cruel word he'd spoken, it all came down to this single piece of paper. Judge Hawkins unfolded it carefully, her expression neutral at first. Then her eyebrows rose, and that familiar twitch appeared at the corner of her mouth. She read it twice, then looked up at me with something that might have been admiration. "Unbelievable," she said, and then she burst into laughter. "Smart woman." The paper contained a single sentence, written in my own handwriting. I never signed a prenuptial agreement, and the house was purchased with my money before our marriage. It was such a simple statement, but it destroyed Thomas's entire case. His lawyer had built their strategy around the forged prenup, claiming that I'd agreed to limited assets in case of divorce. They'd argued that Thomas deserved half of everything, including my business, and the house his mother thought should belong to people who deserve it. But there was no prenup. There never had been. And the house, the beautiful home that Amber wanted to redecorate, that Margaret thought finally belonged to the right kind of people, was mine alone. I'd bought it with money I'd saved from my architecture business 2 years before I even met Thomas. "Your Honor," Thomas's public defender stammered, "we weren't aware." "Of course you weren't," Judge Hawkins said, still chuckling. "Because your client lied to you, just like he lied to everyone else." She looked directly at Thomas, her expression growing serious. "Mr. Mitchell, in 30 years on this bench, I've seen a lot of people try to manipulate the system. But rarely have I seen someone so systematically cruel to their own spouse." Thomas tried to speak, but Judge Hawkins held up her hand. "You forged your wife's signature on multiple documents. You stole nearly $200,000 from her business. You conspired with your mistress and your mother to defraud her of her home and livelihood. And according to the evidence presented, you even discussed taking out a life insurance policy on her without her knowledge." The courtroom was completely silent. Even Amber had stopped fidgeting. "Mrs. Rodriguez gets everything," Judge Hawkins declared. "The house, the business, and full restitution for all stolen funds. Mr. Mitchell, you get nothing except the criminal charges you're already facing." Thomas's face went completely white. Amber made a small choking sound. Margaret actually gasped out loud, the same woman who told me that morning that the house finally belonged to people who deserved it. "Furthermore," Judge Hawkins continued, "I'm ordering a restraining order. Mr. Mitchell, you are not to contact Mrs. Rodriguez or come within 500 feet of her home or business." As the judge's gavel came down, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Peace. The man who'd whispered that I was nothing, who'd planned to steal everything I'd worked for, who'd made me feel small and worthless, was finally facing justice. 6 months later, I was sitting in my beautiful kitchen, the same one where I'd discovered Thomas's affair, drinking coffee and reviewing plans for my biggest project yet. A real client this time, not a fake one, a tech executive who'd seen my work and wanted me to design his dream home. Thomas was in prison, serving 2 years for fraud and conspiracy. Amber had received probation and community service, but her reputation in our small business community was destroyed. Margaret had moved to a tiny apartment across town, her days of looking down on people finally over. My architecture firm was thriving. Word had spread about the divorce case, and somehow my story of fighting back against betrayal had attracted new clients who respected my strength and determination. I was busier than ever, designing homes for people who appreciated both my talent and my character. The house was quiet now, but it was a peaceful quiet, not the tense silence of hidden secrets. I'd redecorated some rooms, not because someone else demanded it, but because I wanted to make the space truly mine. The walls that had witnessed so many lies now held photos of my family, my achievements, and my dreams for the future. Carlos stopped by every Sunday for dinner, proud of his little sister who'd learned to fight back. "You know," he said one evening as we sat on my back porch, "I always knew you were stronger than Thomas gave you credit for." I didn't. I admitted. For a long time, I believed what he told me about myself. But you figured it out when it mattered. I thought about that small piece of paper, the simple truth that had destroyed Thomas's elaborate lies. Sometimes the most powerful weapon against deception is just refusing to accept it. My phone buzzed with a text from a new client asking if I could design a house for her family. I smiled and typed back that I'd be happy to help. After all, I was in the business of building homes, creating spaces where people could be safe and happy and loved. And I was very good at my job. The woman who'd once been told she was nothing had built something beautiful from the ashes of betrayal. The house that supposedly belonged to people who deserve it was home to someone who'd earned every square foot through hard work, integrity, and the courage to fight for what was right. Thomas had been wrong about everything, but especially about one thing: I wasn't nothing. I was everything I'd always been, and more than I'd ever imagined I could become. And that was more than enough.